What shall now become of our company that has traveled so far in fellowship? Shall we turn west with Boromir and go to the wars of Gondor, or turn east to the fear and shadow? Or shall we break our fellowship and go this way and that, as each may choose? Hey everyone, Yoyston here, and I hope you all are doing well wherever you are in Middle-earth. Happy Tolkien Reading Day for 2025. Just as we do every year, a bunch of us Tolkien YouTubers released videos about this year's theme as set by the Tolkien Society around the same time, and our friend Voice of the Rings has made a playlist. That playlist can be found in the description and cards. This year's theme is on fellowship and community. Today we will talk about the original intention of the Fellowship, with some subtext and so forth having to do with it, and honestly how, either planned or not, the Fellowship needed to break. They needed to fail to succeed. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today, and every day since we began this channel. Let's begin our tale. To start off, something that always gets me thinking is what was Gandalf's original plan past Lothlorien? Now, I do have another video all about that and his possible strategies, so I won't get into it too much here, but why I mention it first is that I almost wonder if Gandalf did not have a plan from the outset for the whole Fellowship, because he knew that the Fellowship would change a lot before the end. Either it would break, or there would need to be many changes of plan, so he didn't make an entire plan, and he was just taking it step by step. Of course, it is possible that he did have a way to Mount Doom that he never shared with the company, but honestly, I would doubt it. Particularly because he knew the risks of the journey, and that if the Fellowship would split, he would want them to have a contingency plan, so he probably would have shared it. Now, honestly, I don't think he had one, nor really was going to bother thinking about one until the time came, perhaps in Lothlorien. Heck, even after Rivendell, they weren't quite sure, all of them, what path they would take to get to Lothlorien, whether it was over the mountains or through Moria. They weren't sure on that plan either. So, in all honesty, Gandalf might have taken the Black Gate or the Morgul Pass, but he was not much concerned about it until it was to be that leg of the journey, come what may in the meantime. If he had lived, and perhaps that would have made the company stay together at least longer, it might have been even detrimental to the fate of the Ring to have such a large party. Well, big compared to just Frodo and Sam and Gollum. Pass one of those ways, the Black Gate or the Morgul Vale. No, it needed to be an even smaller group to get through Mount Doom in the ways that Frodo and Sam did with Gollum. To some degree, Gandalf probably could tell that the Fellowship would change greatly before the end. It wasn't meant to be that the Nine would make it all the way to Mount Doom together. Now, echoing that, as we know with Boromir, for our next point, it wasn't going to be 9 members, not at the end. Boromir always was headed back to Minas Tirith, but would journey with the Fellowship along the way, having their back and helping them. Of course, he had his other motives, which we'll speak about in a second. Aragorn, due to his destiny, carrying Andoril and so forth, would also go to Minas Tirith at some point. Yet I always have had the feeling he never planned to directly abandon Frodo until at least after the ring was destroyed. So Boromir knew in his heart he would go back to Minas Tirith, and through his corruption of the ring, of course, that drove him to attempt to take the ring from Frodo, but honestly, that was always his plan. His plan was always to take the ring back to Minas Tirith, and so in some ways we might even assume that there was a bit of manipulation with Boromir joining the company and being there, and along the road hoping to steer them of their will to Minas Tirith. When he knew he couldn't do that, that's when the ring broke him and he tried to take it. That was his task, and so he would travel as far as he needed, do what he needed to get the ring back to his people, until at last he understood that it wouldn't save his people, and then he perished. But with that in mind, the Fellowship was surely fractured from the beginning. And don't get me wrong, I love Boromir, and Boromir surely redeemed himself by the end. But if Boromir stayed with the Fellowship, and somehow they had survived Parth Galen and made it to the other side, Boromir's heart would have been torn in two. And he would still be subjected to the ring's temptation itself, even as he, in his own mind at least, abandoned his people for the quest of the Fellowship, possibly driving him to do something at an ill-opportune time, and perhaps sacrificing everything. There was always going to be this conflict, sooner or later. It was better indeed that Boromir attempted to take the ring when he did, instead of, climbing the stairs in the Pass of Cirith Ungol. That's when Boromir's mind fractures, or near the Black Gate, or something else. That could have ended the whole quest entirely. Yet another reason the Fellowship would inevitably break, or the corruption that men were susceptible to the ring might have cost the world everything in the end if they had stayed together. Looking from the perspective of another character, Aragorn, at least for some time after Gandalf's death, knew that the breaking of the Fellowship might be coming, or at least some sort of crossroads. A conversation of their future needed to happen, and when it did, Aragorn proposed almost a direct split. Himself, Gimli, Frodo, and Sam would press on, while Pippin, Merry, Boromir, and Legolas went to the White City. Thus is why I don't think Aragorn planned to ever leave Frodo until the task was finished. Gondor needed defending, even by these few members of the Fellowship, and not all of them, at least not according to Aragorn, would need to go to Mordor. It is an interesting prospect, because it yet reinforces this idea that the Fellowship was intended, at least in some aspects, by some people to only go so far, to bring Frodo only as far as they could, before some matters took them elsewhere. Elrond foreshadows this a bit as well, saying that no oath would be laid upon them, yet none would truly abandon Frodo. Yet they all knew that this was Frodo's task. Elrond could see that they could not foretell what they would meet on the road and how it could change their individual courses as well. It was, for lack of a better term, a Hail Mary sort of play, to get Frodo as close to Mordor and Mount Doom as possible, and hope that he and his will could carry out the rest. Which he could not without Sam and Gollum especially, who incidentally destroyed the One Ring himself. Not that anyone would have been able to willingly destroy the ring, of course. That's how desperate this plan was. How it was planned out from the beginning, it wouldn't have worked. Because Gollum wasn't accounted for, because the lust of the ring, at the very end of all things, wasn't accounted for, not during the Council of Elrond. So, the original plan of the Fellowship, it is worth pointing out, would not have worked. Again, it needed to fail in order to succeed. This actually brings me directly to another point as well. Gollum. The company would have easily kept Gollum at bay, so how would they have gotten into Mordor, and how would the ring have been destroyed? Too many people who would have been susceptible to taking the ring for themselves away from the fire, yet not crazy and violent enough to take it on the very brink of the fire and dance, falling into it, would have prevented the ring from ever being destroyed anyway. Of course, another point, and one of the many of these points that I've toyed with in different theory videos, is that Rohan and Gondor, without the members of the company that they received, in comparison to the utter sizes of these kingdoms, the few members actually ended up saving them. They had such presence in battle, commanded such respect and authority, did so many important things that without them in Rohan, without them in Gondor, the realms of men would have utterly been lost. This is an obvious point, but one worth mentioning. Yes, perhaps the Fellowship could have together gotten to Mount Doom, but there might not have been much in terms of the realms of men to still fight for. I do explore that in a theory video where the company does stay together. And of course, after Gandalf's death and return to life, he never tried to reinstate the Fellowship to find and continue guiding Frodo. He knew that Frodo's fate was not directly in his hands anymore, but they could still do things like the diversion at the Black Gate to help him get closer to Mount Doom. Even then, the Fellowship at least held to that purpose, and still were doing whatever they could to get him as far as they could. But Gandalf recognized that the members of the Fellowship, all of them, could be also better used elsewhere, with Ents, with the Rohirrim, Oathbreakers, Gondorians, and the like. A final point, and perhaps most importantly, this whole thing was a leap of faith. All of this, the Fellowship, the quest of the ring, was an act of desperation, one final hope to destroy the One Ring. Like Eärendil sailing against fate, or at least what he considered to be fate, to seek the Valar and ask them for aid. There was no guarantee, hardly any chance he would even make it, but he did, and it saved everything. If the Fellowship had remained and done all they could, applying perhaps even more pressure and notice to the quest, it could have all come to ruin. Less pressure and less attention that two small hobbits and their gangly companion went through, so that others could attend to things elsewhere, perhaps just made all the difference. It's the same logic applied to making the Fellowship so small and not including greater elves to begin with. This was a quest of stealth. And after the end of the Fellowship of the Ring, it needed even greater stealth, even greater secrecy, while others were called to other tasks. It was their faith in Frodo, Sam, the will of Eru, and the Valar, that Frodo would have success. Sometimes the hardest thing to do is less, especially when it comes to those we care about. And that is what they were forced to do. Well, less in the sense of directly helping Frodo, but they still obviously accomplished a great deal for Rohan and Gondor, and Frodo at the Black Gate. To wrap all of this up, the Fellowship needed to fail for victory to be achieved. It was only a matter of time in the lore before it did, and though it did, and other characters may have felt guilty for it at times, it needed to happen. And I think each member of the Fellowship came to realize this in their own journey by the end. Though they were apart, they never stopped trying to aid Frodo. And so I'll leave us with this question. Did the Fellowship really fail? From this tale, we see that the bonds that hold us together are far more than distance can measure. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video, and happy Tolkien Reading Day. Check out that combined playlist in the description below, and if you enjoyed it, hit that like button and share this with a friend. Let me know your thoughts on this matter in the comments below. If you'd like to support us here at the Men of the West, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, who just came out with some new candles based on the members of the Fellowship, or order some Weta or United Cutlery Lord of the Rings sword statues and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout, and please check out our merch. Join our memberships and Patreon for access to our Discord and our monthly podcast coming soon. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members, Ed Patterson, Comic Nut 64, Brian Hunley, Peter Shepard, John Hume, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Theodore, Zumi, Toads Morgan, and Joby Weasel. Thank you all so much. Please subscribe to join the Men of the West, and I'll see you all again next time. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me on this adventure. Until the next one.